We still disagree about the measles after commercial break. All right, now, federal judge.
Send them off to ISIS.
Oh, God, why did I get them started? Federal judge questioning whether it is constitutional for the government to put people on a no-fly list without telling them why. Mr. Muhammad, who's a Somali American from Virginia, says he was put on the no-fly list after visiting family in Somalia and Kuwait, where he was detained back in 2009. He was detained after going to the airport in Kuwait to renew his visa. Muhammad said he was questioned about whether he knew Osama bin Laden and other terrorists. He says he was then taken to a deportation facility where he was visited by FBI agents who said that his travels raised red flags. Muhammad says the claims are baseless and he's being discriminated against because he's Muslim. All right. It's an interesting case, Mayo, about no-fly list. There is certainly, one could argue, a national security issue about certain people that we have on terror watch lists. We don't want them getting on planes. We want to have alert systems. But on the same end, where does the constitutional right start and stop for someone, even if they associate with interesting people or they go to places that we find to be hotspots of terror around the world?
Well, I mean, almost anywhere in the world is a hotspot of terror. It depends on how much you want to look for it. But when you stop and you look at a young man who was born in Kuwait, he can't go home simply because he was born in Kuwait. That's like saying everybody who lives on John Gotti's block is a mobster. It's not true. You may know John Gotti, but it doesn't mean that you're, no matter what.
Have
Jimmy
you ever
says.
been to that block?
No, but at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that you should be, you can't fly because you grew up in Queens someplace. Here's a guy who has no due process. He's being deprived equal protections of the law. And if you have a basis to believe this guy's a terrorist, then prosecute him. Go after him. Do what you need to do. Don't let him wander around in the first place.
I believe so.
Yeah. I think even if he's not an American citizen, if the guy is trying to fly, if you have a good faith belief and a good reason to keep him out, it's greater, and then do so. But then you ought to be able to litigate that and provide the evidence as to why this person can't fly, instead of just saying a blanket statement, you're from Kuwait, you've been to Jordan.
From a constitutional standpoint, what basic rights do you have not to be guilt by association?
Well, you have a First Amendment right to travel. So the right is rooted in the First Amendment, which is why I asked if he were an American citizen. The problem is, as Jimmy started nodding, there's no way to challenge your placement on the list. You don't get notification of the reasons. The government has invoked the state secrets privilege through the Holder administration so that it doesn't have to turn over the reasons why the person has been placed on the list, because turning it over obviously would undermine the national security interests. So I thought about it. I mean, there should be a mechanism whereby they can at least submit the reasons to a judge ex parte in camera under seal, so that at least a neutral third party can approve or disapprove the reasons.
And he is a naturalized U.S. citizen.
You got to give the government as much leeway
a
on
wide
this
berth,
as possible.
yes.
As wide a berth as possible. It's entirely legal, but that was my exact thought. You can do an in-camera inspection. There's got to be something resembling due process here. You can't just keep a guy on a no-fly list forever without telling him, without any due process. Put it in camera to a judge, keep it secret, protect the national security, but there's got to be some form of review after a certain period of time.
And you got to figure out when are you talking about it, too.
Right.
This guy left the United States, went to Kuwait, and all of a sudden you're on a no-fly list. You can't get back. So it's different than saying, I mean, you really need a pretty immediate,
clever,
you ought to do it pretty quickly.
Have a great trip.
Yeah, it can't be like, call us in 2 years and we'll have a hearing. I mean, you're stuck there, and sometimes you're in a place where you don't really have any ties.
I want to ask about what is totally ungoverned, seemingly, at this point. I'm talking about drones. A government employee apologizing after he accidentally crashed his friend's drone outside of the White House last week. Apparently, he was pretty banged up when this happened. The worker, who hadn't been identified as an employee at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, if anybody should have known that. Exactly.
No question about that.
Commercial drones, as everybody knows, have become increasingly popular, and many people have been arrested for flying them. Take, for instance, the man who was arrested in New York back in September for flying his drone over the U.S. Open venue. He was charged with reckless endangerment. Senator Chuck Schumer is calling the FAA and the Commerce Department to establish drone regulations by the end of the year. Schumer said New York City has become the Wild West for commercial and hobby drones. 35 states have considered drone legislation, but only 5 to this point have actually passed any regulation for it. I mean, Jimmy, a guy's flying a drone I mean, apparently he passed out drunk, and the thing kept going to the crash on the White House lawn. And there's a debate as to how it was identified, right? Drunk and drone. Easy to say 5 times. But really, the law is trying to catch it with the science here, right?
Oh, absolutely, and it's got a lot
Technology.
of work to do. I mean, you know, the general principle is if I am in a location that's legal, I can be there and look around and see what I can see. And if the open air space is available to everybody, then theoretically you can fly your drone.
Well, we all know Mayo decides to sun himself in the buff here. So if you wanted to bring up, if you wanted to bring a drone up
buying
over
a
his
drone
property,
tomorrow.
no, but seriously, if you wanted to put it in your backyard and your neighbor here, with Mayo, you know, to be able to spy from your backyard into his. That's legal right now, which is insane to me. Don't I have privacy rights in my backyard?
Richard, you can, if I have a
Not
really tall
I mean,
tree,
stick a telescope
not.
into your
if
house.
I have a really tall tree in my
true.
backyard, I can climb up to
Right.
the tree and be looking in your window, which I
Right.
did 2 weeks ago. No,
2 weeks ago. Do we need rules here?
we do.
Right?
Absolutely. We do. You got to have rules, just even for aircraft safety. You know, there's a threat that these drones can make a helicopter or a plane come down.
Yep.
But
And that's
Mark,
a
what are the
major
rules?
concern at all of the major airports, and even probably more so at the rural airports.
What are
Well,
the constitutional
I
rules?
suppose
if
that
you're
the-
flying in a place you're allowed to be.
Well, I suppose you can restrict air rights. We do it in New York with buildings and stuff like that. So I suppose the law would be rooted in the rules of trespass.
Are we going to
something
have
like
little
that.
police flying around in drones giving tickets?
Well, you know,
What?
that's really the thing that's worrisome.
do you
I'm not that
enforce?
concerned about the droning peeping Tom. I'm concerned about the government using the drone to penetrate the interior of your house and spy on what you're doing within the house.
To
That's
play
the
the music,
troubling
that means we're going to take a break. We'll be right back.